Welcome back to the Mom Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick, and co-host as always is Chris Lucian. And today we got an exciting topic about safe, peer-driven goal setting and 360 retro. And I think it's good for Chris to introduce us to this topic. He's much more experienced with it than I.
All right. So we alluded to this to a previous episode, the one based on the promotion nominations system. And so, this is an interesting topic because, everybody has these kind of maybe mandated annual or biannual reviews that people have, right? And sometimes it comes from, an HR department or maybe some, senior leader at an organization. And, largely time and again, different companies have been at, things just felt lackluster with the whole system. I think actually, maybe before my current situation, most of my leaders, managers that I reported to had always just said, hey, why don't you make your goals and then show them to me, and then I'll cross them off when you're done. And even if you put a goal that was already completed as your goal for next time, they were happy with it. They just needed something in the system, right? And so I understand that this is not how everybody does it, but I think more often than not, I ran into that sort of experience, right? And so then when we had started scaling the mob, which is the kind of the first place that we started talking about it, I wrote an experience report for Big Agile, maybe in 2015, 2016 timeframe. And we did a retrospective. We just said, hey, how do we make the goal setting process not feel useless, And and it's pretty harsh, but even just before that, I'd been kind of getting goals that were stuff that I made up, and they'd be really easy to obtain, and it was just kind of a cross off a checkbox. So one thing that we just said is we kind of maybe came up with what makes a good goal, right? And so it's like based off of feedback and other things along those lines. And so what we did, actually originally it was like self-analysis, right? And we came up with a retro, and we analyzed ourselves, and there was no feedback in there, right? It was more of like you reviewed your history and kind of did a retrospective on yourself and came up with your goals, and that was good for a while. And I think we talked about that in another episode. But then, more recently, we just said, hey, we need external feedback to influence the goals too. And so that came out of another retrospective, and that led to this essentially safe version of a 360 retro. And, a lot of it, a lot of the criteria is evaluated. So maybe Austin, you've been through the process recently. Do you want to talk a little bit about the steps that we go through, and then maybe we can explain how we got there?
Yeah, sure. And I guess one thing I'll highlight before I share that is I think even though many organizations require a formal goal setting process, I think this kind of thing is very good, even if it's not required to put in your system of like, oh, here are my goals for the year or whatever. It's a very healthy thing for feedback and growth and that kind of thing. Like, oh, what can I get better at? So there's a couple different pieces to it. I think I'll hit the piece that I think I like the most. So there's kind of like a self-reflective piece where you look at the year and you analyze yourself. And I think that there's value to that there. And so basically someone facilitates a retro and you look over, the timeline, and you put some events. If you're doing it in person, it was like on a sticky wall. And then I think we've done it remotely with just any kind of sticky, virtual sticky board. And so I think that process is you look at what are some highs and lows from the year. And then is force field analysis, am I remembering that right?
Yeah, the timeline and a force field analysis.
Okay, cool. So what things are propelling you, what things are pulling you down. And then from there, it's a kind of a one-on-one facilitated thing with a facilitator that someone volunteers to help you out with. And I found some value in that process. Like it's good. And then you pick some potential goals from looking through that analysis. But the thing that I really enjoyed the most was getting feedback from your peers. So maybe I'll kick it to you for that one. So how does that work? So that's kind of like your internal analysis, like doing therapy on yourself, so to speak.
Yeah.
How does it work getting feedback from others for your goals for the
Yeah.
next
So
year or so?
the process right now as it stands is we do so on the product that the person's working on. So these are the people that you work with every day, for the time being. And so, people can move between teams whenever they like. But if you're on the team for an extended period of time, the best people to give you feedback are the people on your team. And what happens is they first do kind of an ideation and affinity grouping. And the way that it's done is the everybody on your team, including yourself, will write a sticky note with the number one most important skill to improve on or work on or learn for each individual as you think of them. And so these don't have any names on them. So if you're on a team of 9 people, you'll write 9 sticky notes, one for yourself included. You will put that up and you'll have 81 sticky notes afterwards. You affinity group that down, you pare it down as you can. And then that kind of concludes the the non-double blinded piece of it. And then what happens is then we feed all of that into a survey that then has all the items that resulted after the affinity grouping as options for the most important skill to improve, and the maybe the most important skill for that person to teach. There's a variation that I thought of fairly recently, but then what the person gets is kind of this list of, hey, the 8 other people on your team thought that you should, or actually no, it's the 9, because it also includes yourself, right? These are the things that you should improve on. And so some data trends then come out. And so you create a bar graph out of that and then rank them. And so some people have like one skill, right? Maybe it's test-driven development all the way up. Everybody says this person just needs test-driven development. That conversation is really easy, right? But then, there are other people that have like 1 in 9 different items, right? One thing, 9 different items. And so that might mean that they're doing well in many areas. And that might be a good time to talk about learning more about coaching others, right? Or it could be that they're struggling so much that they're kind of struggling on all fronts. And so that might also be an area where it's like, okay, pick one of these things and focus on it and systematically eliminate these from the list over the course of years, right? And so my favorite quote out of one of the retrospectives that we had after doing this process, the process overall, including the timeline retro, this was early on, was that it was the first time that goals had been set for them that they actually identified with, really, and meant something to them. And so, but this interesting, the 360 piece of it, the piece that everybody kind of contributes to that feedback, that results in one goal, and then the self-analysis results in a second goal. And then those 2 goals are carried for the next 6 months, based on an HR requirement sort of thing. But, we can do it more often, we can adjust those, but the regular cadence is kind of set by the overall requirement, and it works really well. And it's been born out of retrospectives, and we also retrospect on the process every 6 months, every year. And yeah, it's evolved over time. So
and I think I'll second that on the value that it's before, like any goals I've set before have felt more arbitrary, or even when I do like the deep internal analysis, like, oh, what do I really want to do this year? And I'm like, oh, I really want to speak at a conference, or I really want to learn this skill, or that, I've had value there. But the biggest difference I felt was from the peers, right? And so where you say like, okay, so I have a goal that is driven from my peers who have worked with me hours on end for the last year or however long I've been on a team. And so there's a lot of meaning to that. There's a lot of weight to that, and it's much more motivating to like do something about it, right? And so I second the value, and I also want to note some variations. So what you just outlined was kind of the anonymous version of getting feedback from the peers. There's also been 2 less anonymous versions that I've one I experienced personally, and the one I heard about from a lightning talk from another mob programmer. And so the one example of a non-anonymous version is we basically did the same sticky retro, but then we just put names on it, and because we were currently in a mob that was striving for the ideal of continuous radical candor, right? Kindly giving each other feedback, and uninhibited, right? It was kind of the thing we're going through. So we came to do this 360 retro, and we're just like, hey, what do you all think about just putting our names on it and then talking about it, right? And so that way we can help clarify what we meant, and kind of put more language to it. And that was also very valuable. And so I think if the safety level of the team is high enough, you might be able to pull off something like that. And then another variation was, I don't know if they did both, but they either replaced what you said, the anonymous thing, with this thing where they would, maybe you can describe it.
I know the story. Yeah.
So go ahead. Yeah.
On a team with 11 people on it, they did this process, and then shortly after, one of the members of the team invited the rest of the team to optionally participate in a non-anonymous version of it. And so I think 6 out of the 11 people participated in the second round. But the second round was basically direct feedback, between all these people. And they ended up, I think, sitting down together and kind of doing something very similar to Troika Consulting, which is a liberating structure where they kind of randomized who they sat down with, gave face-to-face feedback directly and intentionally, and then kind of randomized it again. And out of that, they said that they got a lot more value because they could actually talk and get feedback about the feedback, right? The vanilla model of this is anonymous. It is overly safe, and with the assumption that there may be a lack of safety of some kind in the system. But having that optional direct feedback for people looking to improve and grow, I think is really important, and it has a heavy influence on, I think, the dynamics in the team.
Yeah, and what was it was really inspiring, and I think I'll share a little bit about how they did that in detail. So it was funny. So Zach Rogers, which we've had on the show before, he was on the one where we did it direct to each other. And he was also in the example that you just talked about. And then he did a lightning talk about what they did. And in the lightning talk, he basically gave an example. And I think the model I remember was he would say, who would like to receive feedback from me, or something like that, right? And then, so I think me, you, and then someone else volunteer, like in front of the audience. And he's like, would you like positive feedback or constructive feedback? And then I think both of us said both or something. Yeah. And then we observed Zach very well in a great fashion do the SBI model of situation, business, impact, where he'd be like, sometimes when you're in this situation, I see you over navigating, Austin, and it has this impact on the team. And so maybe step back, and so he in front of everybody, he gave this great example of how to give feedback in a non-anonymous but also kind and considerate way that is constructive and helpful. And then he also gave positive feedback as well. But it was very inspiring, and I think it's an experiment I'd like to run. I haven't been able to do it yet, but I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the public feedback thing, I think, was really good, because it also kind of demonstrates to everybody else in the room, like, hey, feedback is okay, it's wanted. As kind of the leader role in the group, I did have, I wanted to make a point of it to illustrate, like, it is good to ask for critical feedback and to act on it, and so that's also really important for sure.
Yeah, and one thing that jumps out to me anytime we talk about feedback is, I think what you can see here is there's different scaling of feedback depending upon the level of safety and the context. And I think after years of doing it this way, we've discovered all these variations, because different contexts need different things, right? So psychological safety seems high enough, you can go straight for it. If it's a new team and there's a lot of shuffling that's been happening, maybe leaning on the anonymous, so you can kind of flex to the context, and then also the frequency. So I think something like this could be an anti-pattern if this is the only time people give feedback to each other, right?
Yeah.
And so I think these kind of things are good because it's a reminder to do it if you're not doing it at all. And also, I think while I'm on a mob that has high psychological safety, our team, and we're giving feedback to each other constantly, there's a different mindset you have when you're giving feedback on what just happened versus what happened over the last year, and you kind of think more big picture, right? And you have deeper thoughts about the feedback, right? So I think it's a both and I think if it's either one or the other, there might be problems, but yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I've seen people work towards developing strengths in certain areas based on the feedback, and they've made a lot of movement, right? And so it really is kind of an agility kind of versus maybe a more waterfall thing, right? Because if you ask for feedback once every 6 months, then you're going to kind of like say, okay, your target's over here, and then you're going to go 6 months this way. It's like, oh, your target's actually over here, and you're going to go 6 months that way. And you're going to, you know, you're going to overshoot, right? And so that might be, hey, for the next 6 months, you need to learn JavaScript, but maybe you only needed, you know, 2 weeks of JavaScript, and then you really needed to go into interpersonal dynamics, right? And so, you know, you know, basically the more often you give and receive feedback, the more often you can steer. And so it's the same thing with agile development versus waterfall development. You end up going way off in one direction for a while. And so you run the risk of becoming overly specialized over the next 6 months. And so the more frequent feedback cycle is important. And so, you know, that also goes to show kind of that, you know, maybe these, you know, either HR or company mandated goal setting periods is just like the attempt at the minimum viable feedback loop, right? And so, and if people don't take it seriously, then it's even worse, right? And so, not only should we take it seriously, we should increase the frequency. So, you know, there's kind of a saying out there, like, no one should be surprised if they're ever fired, right? Because like that means that they went, you know, long time without knowing what was wrong, which means that there were no feedback loop. And I think that that's in general a problem, you know, across any industry really, is that if people aren't giving and receiving feedback, especially between a leader and led relationship, then, you know, you get these surprises. Now, it's better if you can do that, you know, peer to peer and in a safe way and often. That's how we become the best version of ourselves, because we can now, you know, say, hey, we don't know too much about we don't know so much about JavaScript that our interpersonal aspects have suffered now, and so you're great at JavaScript, but you can't talk to people, right? Like that's not where you want to be. And the way that you get to the place where you have a tight balance is by studying up on JavaScript for a while, getting to the point where you need to be, and then working on your interpersonal for a while and getting where you need to be there, and then working on the next thing for a while. And so you can kind of move things along, you know, kind of tending to the weakest link maybe a little bit. But also I think there's another side of it, you know, that's still missing from the process. And that's just the skill that the person's best at, you know, when are they coaching it? And so, you know, I think that my feedback in the next retro might be that there needs to be something that also looks forward from the perspective of the team. Like, what do I want to learn more from other people? Or maybe people just need to learn about coaching more. But yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's gotten into one of my goals before. And I found that helpful, was not only, hey, what do I need to learn, but what do others want to learn from me? You know what I mean? And so that was helpful. And I'll share one, maybe for my last thing, I'll share a recent story that's extremely raw on this point of feedback. So I recently joined a new team, and they had a mob timer up, and my assumption was, when I saw the mob timer, it was that they were doing strict style navigation, so that there's the driver, and then the navigator is the one speaking and telling the driver what to do. So I operated in that way, and we went days in that style where they were actually this whole time wanting or operating in a mini navigator style. And so basically they were ignoring the part of Mobster that said, this is the navigator. And then they were confused every time my name showed up as the navigator, that I all of a sudden spoke up a lot and was being very like navigatorial, right? Like, almost like commanding. And there wasn't like a tight feedback loop built in, for us yet. And I think the pain reached a breaking point after days that we talked about it and realized that all that pain was just because they were in a mini navigator style and I was in a strict navigator style. And I was honestly trying to adopt to their style, but I just didn't even know what it was. And so I think there's a correlation between pain and duration of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and maybe in this case, it just took a while for the pain to surface to a level for someone to say something. But and so I think if you're afraid of giving feedback, just know that it might be uncomfortable to do it, but you are preventing so much pain the sooner that you do it, And so I held on to, I sensed it, and I didn't make it a point to talk about it for about a day. And I wish I'd have done it sooner. So, so I think.
Yeah. And I mean, there's definitely like, these ideas of the, 45-minute retros and things like that,
Yeah.
But if you're trying to adapt, right, if you're trying to center and return and get into the mindset of the team, yeah, asking for feedback in general is often really just important to do. And it sometimes is really hard to verbalize it, especially when you're developing kind of new relationships. But that's also kind of the storming, forming, norming sort of process that you go through anyway. People get used to each other's personalities, but finding the way to be fast at that and be agile about it is really good. So
yep, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and cool. Well, anything else before we close this one out, Chris?
No, I really like this process, and if anybody has any questions, then please feel free to ask.
Right on. Well, please like and subscribe. We love your feedback. It's always so encouraging to get comments on YouTube or seeing the tweets out there about things you liked, which always feels good, but also like, hey, I was confused about this, or this would be helpful if you clarified it this way. So just keep it coming. We really love that. And yeah, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.